for us on this, such a busy day, such a busy time of the term. We're going to be sharing this PowerPoint at the end. I'm going to send it through to Sian. So no need to panic. Anything you see here, you can reuse or re-explore at any point you want. There's also a handout to go with today's session, which is a little bit more detailed, particularly in terms of the departmental audit than you're going to see on your screen. So Sian's going to make that available now. I wonder whether you can put it in the chat, Sian. Do you think that's possible, that we could put it straight up there?
I'll try, Martin. If not, I'll just email it out to people as you're speaking.
And one other thing, and that is that one or two people have wondered whether we could record the session, haven't they? Is that something you can do for us, Sian, or is that?
Yes, thanks, Martin. Yeah, I have pressed the record button and I've just put a little note in the chat so people know.
And it also says on my screen that people are waiting in the lobby. So I think we should be just about ready to go. Right, folks, thank you. Just a quick reminder of who I am. If it's some time since you've seen me, my name is Martin Griffin. I've been a teacher for the last 20 odd years, latterly a researcher and writer as well. You can see the books there, top left. And we're going to be talking about VESPA today, the model that myself and my co-writer created to describe and explore and discuss non-cognitive skills. I think it's worth sharing these two slides with your students, by the way, just to get ourselves back on the same page and remind ourselves why we're here. One of the most damaging myths or constructs, I think, in education is the idea of the learning curve. Here it is. You hear it all the time, don't you? Steep learning curve, or I'm on a learning curve here. Here's the myth that learning is like this. It's smooth. It's kind of inevitable. There are the number of trials along the bottom. You might have a slow beginning, but you're always traveling upwards. There are never any setbacks. You're always marginally better on day 2 than you were on day 1. You never hit a plateau. I think students often go into learning thinking that it's going to be like this. And I think as staff, we often go into projects thinking they're going to be like this as well. I think James Atherton, De Montfort University has a much better way of exploring what a curve looks like. I often share this with students. You say, look, there isn't anything. There's no such thing as a learning curve. What we have instead are a series of plateaus, jumps, troughs, declines. This is what happens over time. So just as a student studying sociology at A-level for the first time finds the opening 3 weeks of the course easy and seems to be traveling up very steeply, but then hits a plateau and then eventually a trough, or hits a decline over a period of time where no matter how hard they work, the grades seem to stagnate or indeed go down. The same thing happens with us when we're trying to put a project in place. We imagine a smooth, inevitable forward movement, and what we have instead are a series of stop-start jerks and jumps and setbacks. So if you've been implementing VESPA over the last 6 months or the last year or so, and this has happened to you, well, welcome to the club. You're normal. This is what happens in messy organizations with 1,000 different variables and moving parts. So a couple of good slides, I think, to share with students to try and bust this myth, what my co-writer Steve calls the lie of linearity, the idea that smooth, inevitable progress occurs with time. And that's where this kind of psychological process of through difficulties is what fascinates me. That's where the VESPA model comes from, trying to figure out what high-performing students do to get through these setbacks, what characteristics and qualities they have. And that's where the VESPA model kind of emerges from. But today's session is going to be different from the usual stuff. Instead of me exploring the model kind of element by element and giving you examples, there'll be an element of that. But really what we're looking at is how to embed it in a much more advanced way. We might already, all of us here, have some version of a kind of VESPA curriculum. It might be quite nascent and it might be kind of held together by string and elastic bands at the moment, but it's there. It's a version of the VESPA curriculum that we're trying to deliver, which means that we can turn our attention to 4 other elements of the project that are kind of much more advanced than you might expect if you were into introducing it for the first time. So here are the 4 things we're going to cover today. VESPA in departments. I'd like us to turn our attention to, well, what's happening in the classroom? What's happening in departmental meetings? What kind of interventions are going on in geography when a student is under target? Or what's happening over in English Lit? Or what are the messages students are hearing in maths GCSE or in sociology A level? I've got a model that I'd like us to have a look at today, a kind of departmental audit, where I suggest a series of questions that your departments might want to reflect on. Secondly, VESPA in classrooms. What if you've got a neat little pastoral curriculum, but you don't feel yet that it's connected with the messages and language being used in classrooms? Are there any approaches we could use in classrooms specifically? Well, I've got some ideas for you there, and we're going to cover that today. Measuring and reporting impact. I've had conversations with a number of schools in Wales, England, beyond, about VESPA projects. I was talking to a school in Italy about this recently, measuring the impact that the project might have and how we might look for a number of measures rather than a single one. Okay, so we're not going to measure the success or otherwise of our VESPA intervention by waiting for exam results and then saying, well, A star to B crept up by 2.1%, so VESPA was a success. Or indeed, it wasn't because this didn't happen. I don't think exam results are a sharp enough tool to begin to measure small changes in culture and climate. So we're going to talk about other ways in which we might do that. That's part 3. Part 4, very quickly at the end, we're going to talk about approaches to supporting student well-being. So 4 things to talk about today. The first 2 kind of sit in a pair and the second 2 in a pair. We're going to take a break in the middle just for 5 minutes for you guys to stretch your legs, grab a cup of tea and do whatever else you need to do. One other thing, I'm going to ask for you to reflect and to scribble and make notes as we go today. Okay, there are going to be gaps where I fall silent for a minute or 2 or 3 or 4, and you get to kind of reflect and think. So if you've got a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, that would be really useful. And of course, if at any point you want to unmute and just say, this is interesting to me, or this has got me thinking, or I'm not sure this suits our context, or whatever, any observations you have as we go would be really helpful. It would really help the session, and it'll help your colleagues in other schools as well. So let's not be shy today. Let's dive in and make some observations. All right, VESPA in departments. Let's get started. I'd like to share with you a model that Steve and I proposed with a group of schools a couple of years ago and that we've worked with a number of times since. It's called a departmental audit. It's a kind of measurement of where we're up to with embedding the language of non-cognitive skills, or indeed the attitude, the lens, if you want, of VESPA in the classroom. So what I'd like you to consider is a very simple 3-part kind of measurement system. And we're going to ask ourselves this question, and we're all going to kind of critically reflect on where our own organizations are up to. All right, so different observations for each of us is obviously quite all right. To what extent are VESPA principles directly or indirectly discussed, explored, or covered in departmental contexts, in meetings, in lessons, and so on? We're going to take each element of the model one at a time, and I'm going to give some questions that you might want to consider. And I'd like you to think about whether you would grade yourself as emerging, developing, or secure. Emerging means maybe this is happening on isolated occasions with occasional references to the amount of effort you put into your study or how organized you might be or how to revise. Is it developing? Is now and again time taken to discuss non-cognitive elements of study? Maybe in the run-up to assessments, are teachers saying, here's how you revise, or here's how you manage your time, or here's how to stay positive when times are tough, or here's how to set goals? Or are you secure? Are there kind of reasonably regular opportunities to discuss the process of learning? Perhaps students are sharing ideas, reflecting on their progress. Perhaps there's a greater sense of metacognition being embedded in classroom discussion. So emerging, developing, or secure. Okay, right, let's jump in, folks. Here's element number one. So I'd like you to think about, this is vision. I'd like you to think about this from your own departmental point of view. I'm going to fall silent in a few minutes and give you an opportunity to think. Before you do, then, here's what a department or a series of departments or a classroom exploring vision might look like. Let's just pick off these bullet points. Maybe teachers are asking students to write down the grades they want. Even better, a prose description of why that grade's important to them. How regularly do you think that might be happening? Maybe your classrooms are making regular references to study beyond the level at which they teach. Okay, this was something that we had to push a lot in our organization. There wasn't much aspiration because we weren't getting messages like this. If you take this course at degree level, you'll be finding out much more about this. Or employment jobs in this particular sector are much sought after because. Real world problems is another element of vision. As biologists, you'll be well placed to tackle blah, blah, blah. Or, it's geographers like us who'll be at the forefront of dealing with this issue or that issue. So students understand the purpose of the course in a wider context, connecting sections of the course to the wider world, referring to the kind of material mentioned on curiosity sheets. We had curiosity sheets. There were 5 elements to them. A podcast you might listen to, a YouTube video you might watch, a chapter from a book that you might want to have a look at, people to follow on social media, things to listen to on the radio. And we'd say, if you're ever geekily into this course, here's 5 things you could be doing to extend your kind of knowledge. And often it was accompanied by teachers saying, well, this documentary is an absolute classic, or every serious business studies student needs to have read this, or you should be following developments in this on social media. And then finally, our teachers kind of encouraging students to commit to written short-term targets. What are we trying to achieve this half term? We've got a 3-week run up to a parents' evening. What are we trying to achieve then? What do we want to achieve by Friday? Let's write down some commitments. So to what extent are those things happening in your classrooms? The final bullet point of each element of the departmental audit is a reference to the kind of questions that we might see asked. We might see asked in classrooms. What does success look like for you? What do you consider to be good grades? What would a great report home from your teachers say? Who do you admire? What do you wish to achieve by your time on this course? What's important to you in a job? All of these things might come up in conversation in a classroom context. So, are you emerging? Are you developing? Are you secure? All right. Well worth considering this one. I'm going to hand over to you. You've got a minute or two to think about what you think discussing vision might be like in your classrooms. You might even think, well, I know it's better in some parts of the school than others, and you might have a few notes around that as well. In the meantime, if you'd like to unmute and make any comments or observations on that one, please do. But it's over to you for a minute or two. Okay.
we do a lot of work with aspirations, Martin, but this just gives us a bit of an idea of how we can go that a little bit further. So,
Brilliant. Thanks for diving in and sharing that. Sorry, carry on.
No, it's like real world problems, and linking subjects to real world problems is something we could easily do. Even if it's a lesson started or something.
Brilliant. That's a really lovely observation. I think it's a powerful lesson starter. We've got an activity, I can't remember whether I showed it you or not. It's in the GCSE mindset called Problem Not Job, which encourages students with higher levels of vision to aspire to solving particular problems they see in the world around them, as opposed to becoming obsessed with the one job they want. And Problem Not Job works best when we're working in a climate where teachers are connecting their subject to problems or developments or issues that they see in the world around them. As an English teacher, I could always do that with critical thinking and reading. All right, we're going to read critically, we're going to understand nuance, we're going to be able to sift fake news and real news because we understand how the world of the written word works, so I could always connect it that way. You'll be able to do the same in your classrooms. Thanks for diving in and mentioning that. Any other observations while we're on it?
Yeah, I think I work with Darren as well, and he'll be aware, obviously, that all of our pupils have got a target sheet on the front of their books.
Good.
So I think that opens that communication about, not only what are you targeted at the end of this key stage, but what is it that you want to do in the future, and it allows that conversation to happen then.
It does, particularly if we can also explore why get this outcome important to you? What doors does it open? Where might you be headed next? Yeah, thanks for that. Appreciate that one. I think thinking about the departments I've worked with, there is obviously, as we'd expect, a kind of uneven coverage of this kind of stuff. So you might find it happening really well in the sciences, but not so much in, I don't know, the humanities. We had a problem with it, I think, in English to begin with, but we could see history and geography were very good at it. So there's some opportunities for departments to reflect on their messaging there, I think. Okay, let's move on. This is effort, okay? How clear are we about the link between effort and outcome? Or have we allowed, accidentally or unintentionally, a message that ability equals outcome kind of dominate, as opposed to effort equals outcome? So let's have a quick look. This is what a department might be like. This top one's important, sharing real data about levels of effort and their connection to the outcome. It absolutely transformed our climate and culture when we did this. So if you can say, we interviewed last year's A grade students, here's what they said about what it takes to get an A in this subject. Here's how hard they worked. Here were the things they did. That's really important, I think. Having a list of subject-specific, proactive, independent study expectations. I think I've shown you these handouts before. If you'd like to see them again, or you want to get in touch with Sian, I'll send some through. What does independent study look like in chemistry? Well, the kids tend to do these things. Or what do students do independently in English literature or economics or law? Next up, rewarding process, not product, okay? So that we're not waiting till the end of a term and then writing a nice letter home to all the kids who got A's. I know that's a very blunt way of putting it, but instead, could we be writing home to students or celebrating with students the ones who have really worked hard? Your teachers have had a departmental meeting and they've chosen 5 people from year 12 who they think have really worked hard this half term. Here's your letter and certificate. Here's an interesting one, positive language around effort and struggle, such as, I want to set a task that pushes you towards the edge of your ability and encourages what academics called desirable difficulty. Okay, so today's lesson should be hard, but it's really going to help you learn. Are we doing that regularly enough for short periods of time? Being aware of the activation energy necessary to start big projects and therefore chunking them down. Modelling sprints in class, bursts of strenuous activity conducted with no distraction. That's really important. We talk a lot about the importance of environment on effort. Okay, we need to work in indistractable spaces. Where are you trying to work? What's the space like? What are your distractions like? What are your routines like? So all of that might be interesting to think about. Is that something that's embedded, do you think? Is it developing? Is it secure? Here are some questions at the bottom. How many hours a week of independent study are you currently doing? Do you think you're working hard enough? How much work would you have to do in order to feel satisfied? What should you be doing that you know you're not? That's a great effort question. Bit of a painful one sometimes. When working, how do you know you've done enough? Do you work more or less than your friends? Lots of things to discuss and raise here. Over to you for a couple of minutes. Where are you in terms of messages about effort? Where's the coverage pretty strong? Where's it not? Where are the inconsistencies? And like you did last time, if you could just jump in and make a comment or two, it's always good to hear from colleagues. Okay, over to you for a moment or two.
And Martin, I think Sarah had a hand up earlier. Sarah, I don't know if you did have a question you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, please do,
question.
Sarah.
I was just going to jump in where you were talking about the praise and the effort sort of thing. We do something called a Praise Wednesday now. So every week, each member of staff is expected to either make a phone call or write a praise card and send it home in the post. So that's a weekly thing from every member of staff. And then there was one for the half term at the end of half term.
That is terrific. Steal that, folks, if you're not already using it. We had three phone calls we had to make on a Friday, but Praise Wednesday, that's an even better idea. I wonder whether midweek is a better position for that. I think that's terrific. So how does it work? How are judgments made? Can you talk us through it a little bit?
It's just based on, how well individuals are working and engaging in the lesson. I find I'm trying to praise the pupils that perhaps sometimes go under the radar and are missed, because they're not the ones who are shouting and screaming about how well they're doing, and they're not the ones who perhaps don't behave ideally every week, and then 1 hour they're wonderful. I'm really trying to make an effort to acknowledge the pupils who do it week in, week out, without fail.
Terrific.
Just to make them feel noticed.
Good stuff. Thank you for that observation. That's really good. And apologies, I can't see when I'm presenting like this. I can't see hands go up, so I missed you earlier. Over to you, folks. Another think, and then any other observations before we move on.
I'm just wondering, Martin, whether those schools who've got sixth forms, that notion of indistractable spaces, whether then there has been any focus on creating those types of conducive environments within schools.
That's a great question. Yeah, come on, folks. And Sian's got a great observation there. And any comments on indistractable spaces in school or college environments?
Zach, I don't know if you want to. Zach, I don't know if you want to comment, because I know that you've recently redone some of the sixth form areas in John Frost School.
Just waiting on Zach here. Zach's mic isn't working. Now, there's some good work to be done on encouraging students or creating spaces that are kind of indistractable, and that might mean looking at classrooms, at common rooms, and shared areas for sure. Thanks for pointing that one out, Sean. If we get Zach back at any point, it'd be good to hear from him. So keep an eye on that one. And we'll move on next to systems. Let's have a look at this. So again, now we're looking at the extent to which departments are supporting the development of organisation, of resources and time. Here we go. So have we got departments that are chunking their course into student-friendly language? It says see below. Don't worry. That's in your handout. I saw a big leap forward in students' organisation of their material when I began translating syllabuses for them and giving them lists. Here you go. There's basically 25 things you need to know about this year. Here we go. Here's what you're going to need to know. Once you've revised all of those, you're clear, you're sorted. Here's how they all work. Here's how they connect. I don't think we had even coverage of that approach in ourselves, and I've seen schools where the approach isn't even either. Some students have a clear understanding of how history is working at GCSE, but I don't know, English language feels vague and nebulous, and they can't figure out where it ends, and they often feel very stressed about it as a result. So think about that one. Checking files and folders, having periods for catching up and tidying up. All right, it's crucial we have the right course material. Here's a list of everything we've covered so far. Let's go through files, folders, exercise books, and check we haven't lost anything. Let's talk about rewards again. The Good News Wednesday, the Reward Wednesday, might have particular themes. So for the first half term, it might be it's all about the effort. For the second half term, you might say to your classes, this half term, I'm looking for time management and organised resources. Everyone hits the next 3 deadlines and has neat and organised folders when I check them is going to get a reward or a letter home of some description. Every Friday, period 5, classes at our school finished at 3:20. I'd try and wrap things up by about 3 so that we could have 20 minutes together saying what's next week looking like. Okay, regular references to the time management challenges ahead. You're going to need to be on the ball next week. Here's what's happening on Monday. Here's Tuesday. Here's Wednesday. I used to do this a lot. Any advice about how I get everything covered? I feel overwhelmed, folks. How are you organising yourselves so that we can encourage a discussion in class and students give me advice? Checklists. Why don't we design a Sunday night checklist so we've always got everything we need with us when we arrive on Monday? Keeping up class awareness of systems through questions. If you could change one aspect about the way you work, what would it be? How would you change it? How do you prioritise what needs to get done? Do you still work the same way as you used to? What's good about the old ways and new ways? What isn't working? How do you record homework? And so on. Plenty to think about there about organisation, breaking courses down and organising time. So again, over to you for a minute or two. And again, any observations, jump straight in because I can't see hands up at the moment. Any observations on this one, folks? How do you think you're getting on? What have you been up to? How do you see the organisation of your students in terms of learning resources or time management?
I think also if colleagues have got any questions in terms of clarity, if there's anything you would like further examples of, or
Yeah.
whether some aspects just need unpacking a bit more.
Absolutely. Or drop anything in the chat as well, and Sean will be able to see that as it arrives if your mic isn't working.
This is something that's massively supported by the form tutor role, isn't it? has obviously come into departments and trying to get pupils to be organised in your subject area, but I think the form tutor role is massive for this sort of thing.
It is absolutely. The form tutor role is central, and we just need to make sure, don't we, that the messages are being repeated in classroom contexts, so that we're not getting mixed messages. But the form tutor's got the holistic sense of what's going on. So you're dead right. Yeah, important one in form. Worth supporting in class, though. Absolutely. Oh, particularly with bullet point number 1, folks, chunking their course down in student-friendly language. I found there's a connection here with revision as well, that students can't space out practice, for example, until they understand exactly what it is they're revising. What precisely is my content? And if these are the 20 things I need to know, they can be much more strategic about, well, I'm going to revise topic A once here, I'm going to leave it for 2 weeks, do it then, leave it for 2 weeks, do it then. Spaced practice, which is a hugely important part of revising effectively, only works once the student knows exactly what the course content is. So are we really clear about everything that the course requires? Interesting one to consider, I think. Let's move on. We've got practice next, okay, revision effectively. So let's have a think about this as tutors, and as our colleagues just pointed out in tutorial or pastoral VESPA sessions, we might be talking about the importance of revision. Are we getting the same sort of messages in classrooms? So let's have a look at the bullets here. Are we discussing practice as a process that has a series of steps? First, collect and collate your information. Next, use this information to solve problems under time conditions. Are we talking about collecting and connecting dots, in unity, all of us together? Or are we accidentally perpetuating this idea that revision is different in history? Or, well, revision's different in my class, which you often hear teachers say, because they haven't quite figured out that holistically speaking, it's the same process, regardless of what you're learning. So it's worth thinking about that one.
Martin, sorry to interrupt your flow. Colleagues have had trouble with their microphones, so we've got some lovely comments that have come through from the previous page. Did you want me to just read
please,
those
let's
out?
jump in.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
So Hannah, thanks Hannah. Hannah said, I like to show schedules for upcoming practical exams in expressive arts from past students to show organisation. So many students struggle with timing rehearsals and setting goals ahead of time in preparation for external examiners coming in. So I think that notion of sharing past students' organisation, that's a good idea, isn't it?
Oh, it's terrific, that is. I'm just capturing that. Hang on. Capturing it. That means I'm stealing that idea. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for that comment. Any others, Sian?
Yeah, there's one from Emma. She says, I think different departments do some of these things, but these lists would be useful to share with all teaching staff. Firstly, so that they can do their own departmental audit, and also to give teachers some ideas about how to support students.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I'm glad you think so. Last time when we worked with a member of staff with these, she decided to take them one element at a time, not necessarily in order. She was really keen to start with effort and just make that the focus of a departmental meeting. So as the head of 6, she was saying, can we all discuss the messages? We want some consistent messages about effort at Key Stage 5. Here's a little series of questions to be thinking about. It's an agenda item on Thursday's departmental meeting. I'd like you all to kind of feed back to me and tell me what you thought as a result of these questions, where you're up to and what you plan to do next. So it's a very simple way, isn't it, of structuring a series of kind of critical discussions in departments. Great stuff. Thank you for that. Let's return our attention to practice. And then Sian, thanks also for letting me know about microphones. We can have a look at comments as they come in, can't we? One or two other things to think about in improving revision. Are students aware of which practice methods have the highest impact on subsequent learning? Okay, we might have said he has done Losky's work in a pastoral setting, but if staff don't know about it, they might be confusing that message by advising students to reread their notes and highlight the key terms, which of course is a low utility revision technique that only works in certain circumstances. Bullet point 3 has been useful for us, particularly analysing where departments are up to. Are departments giving access to a wealth of exam questions, or are they hoarding them for later use? We found this was really interesting, that we had certain departments who were hiding exam papers because we're using that later on for a mock exam, and as a result there was a kind of scarcity of resources for students to revise effectively. Are we encouraging students to organise questions by topic? Or I watched a brilliant biology lesson where questions were just arranged by difficulty. All right, we've got 3 boxes at the front of the classroom: easy, medium and hard. Everyone's going to come up in little groups. They're working in groups. They're going to take one from the easy box. They're going to work in pairs and groups to hammer it really quickly. Then they're going to drop it back and they're going to pick up a medium, and then they're going to pick up a hard. And then they're going to discuss whether they're in the right box and for them personally, which questions were more challenging. Or are we also organising questions by command verb? A little activity on that later on to be thinking about. Regular in-class testing of recall, of course. I think most teaching and learning projects have kind of covered that more recently. RAG-rated revisits of topics, all right? You should be revising things you understand less more often. That's not necessarily a message that comes through. And then designing drills that help develop a particular skill. I watched a brilliant history lesson where the focus was, we're going to spend 15 minutes writing one paragraph and it's going to be A grade quality, and we're really going to pull it apart and analyze its characteristics. Now we're going to try and do another bit in 10 minutes. Okay, now we're going to try and write an entire essay of this quality, but in 45 minutes, because that's how long you'd have in the exam or whatever. And here are your questions at the bottom as well. So lots to think about there. I hope nearly there on this one, folks. I hope you're finding it useful. Over to you. And again, drop your comments in if there's anything you'd like to say or draw our attention to.
I like the last bullet point there, Martin, where you're kind of asking pupils, how do they challenge themselves? Which techniques do they prefer? And I think it's nice to just analyze what's going on, because we know it's, revision is something that pupils always struggle with, especially younger pupils I personally work with. So it's kind of nice to gauge what they're doing, and you sometimes pick out a nice little technique that's going on, which needs to be disseminated amongst the others.
Absolutely. And what I always, thanks for pointing that out. I think that always comes with a caveat for me as well. The studies show, and I've got a great study by Afton Kirk Johnson, which shows that students often pick the wrong revision strategies, but convince themselves they're the right ones. Okay. Oh, I actually prefer rereading my notes and highlighting key terms, sir. It really works for me. Often means it's comfortable for me. So you're dead right about pairing those two questions together. How often do you challenge yourself, as opposed to simply asking which techniques do you prefer? We need a combination of the two so students don't retreat to familiar low utility revision strategies. Thanks for that observation.
Hi, Martin. Just quickly saying hello to Grant, who's just joined us. Hi, Grant. Good to see you.
Hi, Grant. How you doing? Not all microphones are working, Grant, so any comments into the chat?
Apologies, guys. Just picked up a bit of an issue I had to deal with then, and it ran on a little while. Really sorry to be late.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
Shall I move?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to quickly explain to Grant. So we've, Martin has just been obviously sharing his expertise, but also sharing activities or examples amongst ourselves as schools. So if there's anything to add, please do jump in.
Yeah, just to say, based on our last meeting, you know, we've used a lot of the things with the preparation for mocks for us, and one of the interesting things was that when we just talked about revision strategies, that our children managed to pick the top 3 most effective strategies for the revision in our assembly, which was absolutely amazing.
Terrific.
And we're very good at picking the ones at the lower end of the effectiveness scale as well. So, but yeah, really interesting.
That is great. Now, the important thing then is knowing it and doing it are 2 different things. So, but at least we've got that first step, haven't we? And then we can support them in how to revise in those much more challenging ways where you're operating at the edge of your ability. That's a terrific observation. I'm really glad you've had a bit of a breakthrough there. Good stuff. One more then before we wrap up this section of the meeting, folks, and that is to consider where we're up to with attitude. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these. A department who's kind of developing the students' awareness of the psychological component of study might be doing some of the following. Let's go. How often are we acknowledging the difficulty of study? All right. It's entirely normal to feel this is hard, or it's entirely normal to feel a bit down at this time of year. It's all part of the journey. Are we modeling optimism, gratitude? Let's remind ourselves of 3 things we've achieved this week or fortnight. Or I've heard teachers do this one. A month ago, you couldn't get your head around this. Look at you all now. Feedback. Are we handling feedback well? The grade describes your work, not you. Everyone in this room has 3 targets to improve their work. Take a moment to reread the work you submitted, then have a look at your 3 targets. That was a model we moved to, and it changed a lot of the kind of ways in which students interacted with feedback. Previous to that, we had a very uneven coverage of quality feedback. If a student hit their target grade, we'd often give them a well done, top work, smiley face, and that would be it. Others had 5 targets to improve. So there was no kind of parity in class at all, which means you couldn't do a whole class feedback session because some kids were saying, well, I've got no feedback at all. It seems to be perfect. So we had a project called Full Marks Feedback, where I was saying to departmental heads, even if the student has an A or an A star, we give full marks feedback. Here's what you would do next. If you wanted full marks, you would need to do a bit more of this, or I want to see a bit more of this. That way, every student had 3 things to improve. That way, there's a kind of a democracy of feedback, and some students aren't saying, well, you liked mine, I don't need to do anything. So that's one to think about. How are we discussing mistakes? All right, that's the next bullet point, 4th bullet point. Mistakes are information, a bit of a mantra of ours. Let's see what kind of mistakes we're making as a class, and that way we can use them to adjust our approach. Again, it says see below because you've got a little extra activity in your handout to consider for that one. Emphasizing the importance of help. A lot of our informal studies with students found that A grade students asked for more help than D grade students. We had this kind of distinction that we were looking at A and D and why kids with similar GCSEs seem to disappear off in these 2 directions. And one of them was asking for help. A grade students asked for more help than D grade students. So we could be emphasizing that in class. You know, we could get this work done more quickly if we called in some favors. Who could help us with this week? Sharing vulnerability. I had a tough time when I was first learning this. Encouraging or modeling problem solving. Let's describe exactly what's happening and why. Then we're going to use the observe, decide, act strategy, ODA. Very simple. We use that as a simple problem solving tool. I've got a different one to share with you later on as well. so that students felt a sense of kind of control and sense of direction when it came to problem solving, that life wasn't happening to them. They had some sense of engagement with it. And some possible attitude questions towards the bottom there. When something goes wrong, what do you do? List 3 things that are in the process of going wrong at the moment. What are you doing about them? Describe a crisis you're currently ignoring and hoping will go away. That's been a good one. What have you learned from the biggest mistake you've made so far? Tell me about a time when you had to start something again from scratch. How did you feel, and how did you feel once it was done? What have you done since September that you're proud of? Lots to be thinking about there. So over to you again. Any further observations? We'll take a minute or two on that, and then we'll wrap things up with any questions on this part of today's session.
Got a comment coming through in the chat, Martin, which I can read to you.
Please.
Yeah, it's from Emma. She says, I like what have you done since ... that you are proud of. Students often don't like to talk positively about their own work. It would help to boost self-esteem.
Absolutely. Thanks for that observation. It's true that high attitude students are better at reconnecting with previous successes than low attitude students are. So sometimes it's worth kind of demanding that they think about things that they've done well. What are you proud of? What have you achieved? Name 3 things that you know now that you didn't know a month ago. What have you mastered now that you couldn't do in year 11? Questions like that are often really good at reinforcing past success. And it's a cultural thing. It's a classroom thing. The teacher leads that process, I think. Folks, that's the little measurement I've suggested here: emerging, developing, secure. Let's take a moment or two again. We've finished that little section of the day. Any observations? How could we use this? Could this be useful? Are there any particular approaches we might take with it? Any ideas that it's caused you to think about? Again, into the chat or on the mic if there's anything else you want to say before we draw this section to a close.
Martin, I was just wondering how easily, from all aspects that you've discussed over the last, this part of the session, how colleagues feel about where it would fit within their structures, or how easily they feel that those aspects could be included across the curriculum. I know one colleague mentioned about it taking place in tutorials, but the feasibility of it also being placed in other aspects of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comment?
Let's wait for those comments to come in, Sean. We'll give people another minute or two. And I think actually there's one other thing that I would say, and that is I think a lot of the techniques and methods we're sharing here in these bullet points are to do with framing the learning experience in a certain way, aren't they? Linguistically and conceptually. So they're not necessarily time intensive. We can run a feedback session using the kind of language that we're describing here, that engages students and makes them feel as if they've been appropriately challenged, but feedback's important. Or we can frame the experience in a different way. So I think a lot of this might be quite quickly adapted to classroom experiences, and it gives us a kind of conceptual framework through which to look at the learning experience, as opposed to thinking I need a discrete 15 minutes per lesson in which I do this kind of work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it certainly does, Martin. I've got another comment from Emma. She says she's discussed with SLT. Discussed with SLT, we're going to trial a few sessions with Year 10 7 students in registration. We then hope to develop this program further. And then I've got a comment from Hannah who says, I ran a Teach Talk Tuesday session on VESPA last week and started with post-it notes asking, why do your students fail? The result was 100% non-cognitive, and we discussed that non-cognitive elements are rarely discussed in departmental meetings. I hope it's kick-started a few departments. VESPA certainly gave them a lot of food for thought.
That is, what a terrific activity. So let me reframe that in my own, let me just put that in my own words. You've asked staff to you've given them post-its and say, let's write down all the reasons students fail courses. And every single one of those post-it notes sat outside of intelligence or cognition. They were all non-cognitive. Gosh, what fuel you had then to say terrific, and how often are we kind of openly discussing non-cognitive skills and the impact they have. So that sounded like it was a very interesting, what a valuable experience then for staff to realize, these are all the reasons students fail. And yet, it's not something we're discussing at a strategic level as much as perhaps we should be. Terrific meeting, terrific little piece of CPD. And that was in a session called Teacher Tuesdays.
Yeah,
I wonder whether...
Yeah, and Hannah's just made an additional comment saying it was really exciting, but sadly not all staff were there. So, yeah, no, great. Yeah. Isn't
it? Yeah. Teacher Talk Tuesdays are quite fun. You know what? There's quite a bit in here, if we're talking about teacher talk, the way in which we're linguistically framing the learning experience through these bullet points here. There's a Teacher Talk Tuesday in that for you, Hannah, I reckon. All right, folks, let's move on. Thank you very much for the way you've thrown yourself into that. Really appreciate it. So we've talked about a kind of departmental audit, the ways in which you might use that, the way in which you can, the kind of VESPA might creep its way into the classroom experience bit by bit. Here's some more direct use of VESPA in classrooms. Okay, this is something a little bit more direct that I'm going to share with you. What are we looking at? We're at 2:30. We're going to go for about 15 minutes on this. Oh, before we do, let's take a quick break because we're at that halfway point. So before I jump into this one, folks, just a few minutes to grab yourself a cup of tea. It's 2:28, and we'll start back again in 3 or 4 minutes, but it gives you a chance to stretch your legs and nip to the loo and fight off the kids at your office door and so on. So just a few minutes and then we'll start again. Okay. And that gives me a chance, Sean, to check the comments as well, because it looks like we've got some decent ones coming in.
Yeah, we do.
Hannah, if you could tell us more about Teach Talk Tuesday, I'd love to hear about it, because that sounds like something I'd want to be going on in my organisation. Lovely comments, thank you. Right, back in a second, Sean, and we'll jump back in. Okay, folks. Just 1 minute and then we'll get started. Thank you, Hannah. Gosh, that is a really lovely summary of Teacher Talk Tuesdays. Plenty happening there. I'll tell you what, if you're not in Hannah's school, that's a great little thing to talk about. It doesn't overwhelm teachers, as Hannah says. You know, we're all already busy, but there's always something digestible to take away. And look, here's the content of all the things that have been covered so far. That's 17 sessions so far. They look great, with plenty of examples of what kind of might be explored in those. That's being covered this year. Terrific stuff, Hannah. Let's all go to Hannah's school on a Tuesday night. That sounds a good one. Right, I'm going to assume people are back and I'm going to dive straight back in again. We've got one or two other things to share. I'm enjoying this. It's really great to see some of the work that's going on here as well. So what we're going to talk about now is what might it look like if you actually wanted to deliver short VESPA activities in the classroom. Okay, we've considered a kind of, I suppose, a linguistic and conceptual framing of the classroom experience where non-cognitive skills are discussed more regularly in those departmental audits. What about delivering VESPA in the classroom? Here's what I've seen work well. The first aid approach. I was speaking with a member of staff who was saying, well, we don't do VESPA in our organisation in tutorials, but I think we should. She was a bit chippy about it. Instead, I do it in my classroom. So I was saying, tell me about how you do it. And she said, well, I've been through your books. I've chosen my favourite 10 activities. And I use what I call the first aid approach. I wait for the first signs that there might be an intervention needed. And then I pull out one of my favourite 10 activities. So I sat down with her and I said, so if it becomes clear that they're disorganized, you might run a systems activity. She went, yeah, we might use this one or this one. So the first aid approach, it's quite a nice one. I thought I would try and put together a very quick first aid curriculum for you now, in case you were thinking, well, I could have a go at this in my class. I have a vision activity ready in case they're all down. I remember doing that a lot at Key Stage 4. You know, you could feel that in just the temperature of the room change and everyone's down that day. You think, I'm not going to achieve anything going through a poem today. I better just spend 15 minutes seeing what's going on that's making everybody feel so lousy. And it might be a kind of psychological thing or an attitude thing, or it might be well worth spending 15 or 20 minutes doing a quick activity to get them refocused and thinking. So what if you were struggling with a group of students who just lost track? Why are we even doing this? What's it for? I'm meant to be applying to sixth form and I don't even know what I'm interested in anymore. Or everyone's talking about university. I don't even know what I like. So what I thought I'd do is bring along a very quick low vision intervention for you. I was talking about this with some other schools recently who'd done the VESPA questionnaire with a group of their sixth formers and found that there were 30 of them who'd scored either 1, 2 or 3 out of 10 on vision and were saying, what do we do with them? So here's an example of a quick low vision intervention. It's an activity called 20 questions. It's from the A-level mindset. Actually, I should call this another 20 questions, given that almost all the questions are new now. You know how it is. You keep developing a resource until you find that there's almost nothing left of the resource you were using 5 years ago. 20 questions. This has been a good one for students, and you might sit down, students, and say, here's a great way of figuring out what you're into and what excites you about study and where you might want to go next and what to apply for at A-level or what to consider at university. I'm going to give you 20 questions and all you've got to do is choose 10 of them to answer, or in pairs and groups, I'd just like you to talk about your answers to these questions. And it's a fun 15-minute break from sometimes the relentless coverage of content, and it gives them an opportunity to think and refocus. I've split the questions into thematic groups for you, which doesn't happen in the book, but I found really useful. So you say, first 5 questions are to do with your school experience. Let's consider these. Okay. Think of a friend who isn't doing the subjects you are. What enjoyable class would you have them sit in to show them what they're missing and why? All right. I've never done biology. What class would you describe to me? List the topics you've covered recently from most to least interesting. If you wanted to persuade a year 11 pupil about one subject you take, what would you say are its strengths? There's plenty to think about here. Number 4 has been a really good one. Imagine you could only take one subject, but it lasted all week and the classes were really detailed. Which A level would it be, or which GCSE would it be? And what kind of things would you study? Number 5 has been good. If you could specify the homework given to you, what kind of tasks would you ask for? So kids start discussing these. Then you've got out of school interests. We've had some fun discussing these, particularly bullet point number 2. Imagine you had to start and run an after school club for year 7s or 8s or 9s. What would it be about? I often replace that one with, what could you teach a 30-minute lesson on without any preparation whatsoever? They enjoy that one. List 3 clubs you used to attend after primary school or secondary school. Do you have still have interest in those areas? That question 5 is a good one. What activity did you think you might grow out of, but you haven't? Okay, that's often the key to part of their personality, part of their passion or interest lies in that question. Hypotheticals. These are some good ones. This top one's been yielded some ridiculous conversations, inventing it. You know, some people argue education is preparing young people for jobs that haven't been invented yet. Inventing is interesting sounding job. They begin ridiculous. Chocolate taster, sir. But they end up, you know, as you say, let's get rid of all the silliness. Let's think about something that would really fulfill you. That's been good. There's some money questions here. Because often kids are so focused on I just want to earn that they can't figure out what it is they want to do. What problems do you see in the world around you might like to help solve? What ingredients make a good life? What do you regret not starting when you were younger? That's often a good one. So 20 questions there, and often it's just a simple 15 or 20-minute intervention. I really enjoy that one. The kids are usually buzzing a little bit by the end. They might not have left your class going, sir, thanks very much. I now know what I'm applying to university to do. But you've given them a safe and supportive environment in which to kind of handle that difficult question, as opposed to saying, oh, it's not my problem. I've got a ton of stuff to cover on my curriculum. It's often 15 minutes well spent, that one. Low vision activity for you there. So what about a quick low effort intervention? Sorry, folks, I think as I'm talking, I've just realized I'm not sure I clicked the include system audio box. So I'm going to do that for you now so that you can hear the clip that I'm about to share with you. So apologies. I'll just do that now. Yeah, I hadn't clicked it. Yeah, so what about low effort students? None of them are working hard enough. They're all like, well, I try to revise, but I can't. This is a great little activity to share with them. Again, 15, 20 minutes in a classroom situation, and it gets them much more productive. This is called pre-mortem decision making. The idea of a pre-mortem is really interesting. Rather than waiting for something to go wrong and conducting a post-mortem, why did the wheels fall off? Why didn't I do well in my exams? You can conduct a pre-mortem. Apologies, something going a bit funny here. Here we go. That is deciding what the problems might be before they even begin. Let's have a listen to this clip. This has worked really well with my lot recently to introduce the idea of a pre-mortem. This is Matthew Comfer talking about the Cobra effect. Tiny clip, this 2 minutes long. Kids enjoyed it.
So now let me tell you a story about snakes, the British government, and a striking example of where a pre-mortem could have averted a decision-making disaster. During the era of colonialization in India, the British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobra snakes in Delhi. After countless failed ideas, the government decided to offer a cash bounty for every dead cobra. Initially, this was an extremely successful approach, as a number of snakes were killed for this new reward. Here's the problem. Imaginative individuals started to breed cobras explicitly for the income they could now generate. It didn't take long. The government became aware of this, and they quickly scrapped the reward program for dead cobras. However, this led the cobra breeders to set their now worthless snakes free. The wild cobra population became even worse than it was initially. The apparent solution for the problem made the situation even worse. This is now unsurprisingly referred to as the cobra effect. It is also a perfect illustration of the power of a pre-mortem. Embrace a pre-mortem. Consider what failure would look like before you ever go down a path.
Hope you could hear that. That's been a really interesting one to talk about with the kids. A pre-mortem. All right. So what's the study equivalent of a pre-mortem? This has been a good one to discuss with students. We're going to list all the ways in which you could fail to study even when you wanted to, and then we make a plan for each. Here's some examples. So you want to study, but you plan on doing some important research, but your internet connection is down. And then the student makes a decision in the cold light of day right now. What would be a good decision to make in that situation? And they say things like, well, I'd swap to a textbook. You see, in the heat of the moment, they make the wrong decision. They go, well, there's no point in doing any work at all. But with a bit of pre-mortem thinking, they think, oh, yeah, that's likely to happen. Here's what I'm going to do if it does. What about this one? You set aside some time to catch up crucial work, but a friend arrives and wants to hang out and chat. That is going to happen. That's one of the problems that will occur as you try and improve your levels of effort. Let's make a decision now. What are you going to do if that happens? Students put things like, I'm going to work quietly in the library so that things like that don't occur. And you go, brilliant, pre-made decision. What about this one? It's a perfect day for catching up on tasks, but the sun's out. All right. And kids start thinking, yeah, that is a nightmare. It doesn't happen very often. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue to work, but I'm going to set aside some time at the end of the day to enjoy the weather. Great. Okay. There's a noisy debate going on in the canteen. I'm not going to work in the canteen. There's something great on TV, social, or the internet. I'm going to put my phone on airplane settings and I'll catch up with that later on. A close friend suggests grades aren't that important. Classes are boring. College is worthless. Why don't we quit study and deliberately fail all courses? So we give students some examples of all the things that could go wrong as they try and study. And the students make a decision now about how they're going to handle it. It's worked really well for us because we've been able to say all of these things on the left-hand side will happen at some point. Okay. But to have a plan for them now means that you're much more likely to make the right decision in the moment. So 15 minutes with some students who are feeling demotivated and aren't making much effort, and they've got a really interesting strategy to take away there. What about low system students who are all over the place? I don't know where to start revising. I don't know how this course works. I don't know which topics are which. We've seen this work really well in maths recently. We were in a maths retake class and the maths teacher was saying, just put everything, she was reading out the topics they'd covered so far and the kids were putting them somewhere on this grid. How much am I enjoying it? How much am I understanding it? And as the teacher went round, she was looking for the bottom left. All right. She was saying, we've covered this, we've done this, they're all on the board, decide where to put them. And then she was walking up and down, just double checking what people had put in the bottom left. And she was kind of commenting as she went round, there's a lot of this in the bottom left, maybe we should cover that again. Here's where we need to direct our attention next. Here's where you need to focus your systems on revising this or tidying your notes here or missing some or blocking some missed gaps or whatever it happens to be. That's called the bottom left, that activity. It's from the GCSE mindset. It's a very quick systems intervention. And it works really well for chunking your own course down and asking students to begin revising immediately the topics or concepts or ideas that are sitting in the bottom left. All right, good one there. What about students who are saying, oh, I can't revise, I don't know how to revise, I can't be bothered revising, I never seem to get good grades even though I revise really hard. Is there anything we can do in class about that? I've got a good one for you here. It's called the command verb table, and we've been using it with classes this spring and summer as they were going into their exams. So here it is. It's very simple and straightforward. It starts with a clip actually, but so let's have a quick listen. This is educational researcher Douglas Barton talking about, I mean, he's based in Sydney, I think, but he's talking about a UK study exploring how people revised for tests. So let's have a quick listen to that.
We found that practice exams were the #1 predictor of how well a student would do at school. Now, to understand why, let's take a step back and let's think about what students are doing before exams. On the screen at the moment, I've got a group of Year 11 students in the United Kingdom, and let's actually work through and let's have a look at what the majority of these students are doing. Now, up the top, we've got 15% of these students who are making their notes. In other words, these are the guys who've left it right to the last minute. They're sitting down just trying to get their notes finished before the exams. We've got the overwhelming majority here, it's about 56% of students are reading over their notes. So in other words, they're sitting there just reading the notes over and over and over again until it's in their memory. So in other words, we've got 76% of students who are spending the majority of their time simply memorizing their notes. Our top students, on the other hand, our top students are in the minority. They're in this small group of 11% of students who are doing practice exams at the moment. Why do the top students do practice exams? They do it because they realise something that the vast majority of students don't realise. They realise that an exam is not a test of memory. An exam does not test you how much you can remember. It tests you how you use what you remember.
Nice little clip. An exam tests how you use what you remember. And I think that's a really interesting point that we've been emphasising with students nice and clearly recently, how you use what you remember. So here we go. You can say to students, if you need to give them a quick boost, what does your exam ask you to use? How does your exam ask you to use what you remember? Forget the content for a second. Look at the actual tasks. What verb does the exam paper use? This is called a command verb. Are you being asked to describe what you remember? Analyze data based on what you remember? Are you being asked to make a case for a particular point of view because of what you remember? What are you being asked to do with the information you've got? And in this activity, we suggest a model. If you want to have a go at this in your own class, feel free to let the kids tear this model apart. You say, what if this is true, that exams only really ask you to do 4 things? Let's see whether you think this is the case. Number 1, exams require you to define and describe things, ideas, concepts, whatever it happens to be. And if they're trying to do that, they use verbs like label, annotate, list, define, describe, select, state, outline, summarize. Okay? Or what about part 2? Exams ask you to explain how things work. Explain, comment on, demonstrate, identify, calculate, show, prove, verify, consider. All right. And then type number 3, exams require you to analyze why things work the way they do. Analyze, examine, explore, compare, contrast, differentiate, distinguish, survey, review, investigate. And then the 4th thing exams require you to do is make judgments and justify opinions. Discuss, evaluate, assess, argue, justify, criticize. So you can say to students, do you reckon that's accurate? Do you reckon all exams only ever ask you to do those 4 things? Get in your pairs and groups and figure out whether that's the case or not. And you might want to include reference to the exam we get in this course. So you might have handed out an exam paper and say, do you reckon this is what an exam in this course requires you to do? We've had good fun with that one because some students will criticize it and say that's way too simple. Exams require you to do loads of other stuff. For example, what about this question here or this question here? And it's a good activity because they're focusing on the verbs and saying, no, this is asking you to do something completely different to the 4 categories you've got up on the screen, sir. So I think your model's too simple. Whatever the outcome, they agree with it or they don't, you've had a little 15 or 20-minute session where you've focused student attention on command verbs. And they can start grouping exam questions by command verb and practicing exam questions by command verb. And it's way better than grouping questions by topic, because the student simply focuses on memorizing the information associated with that topic. So a very simple activity to do there, the command verb table. And finally, a quick low attitude intervention that might work, particularly if students are all feeling down about the quality of their work. It focuses on feedback. So this activity is called reactions to feedback. You've got a nice little video to watch at the top, which I'm not going to watch with you, but it's good fun. It's funny. This particular chap on the screen is giving some feedback to an employee who absolutely loses it when she hears that her work has been criticised. And it introduces perfectly the idea of the red zone, that initial response to feedback. Shock, anger, despair. Oh my God, sir's never liked me. This is terrible. I can't do anything. Everything's falling apart. I'm never going to pass this course. All of those feelings you get when you immediately see feedback, and that go away after an hour or two as you move into rationalization. Well, maybe it seems true from Mrs. perspective, but they don't understand what kind of pressure I'm under. And then eventually to the green zone. They're right, actually, I need to change something. This piece of work isn't as good as it could be. So by introducing that to students before handing work back, we can say, it's perfectly normal to feel a kind of pent-up anger and frustration when you first see your feedback, but everyone's got 3 targets to improve. So let's try and move through the blue zone into the green zone and take some action. That's been a good 10-15-minute activity to do with students as well. Oh, I finished with this last time. We had a laugh about it. Feedback describes, my feedback's going to describe the work you submit. It's not a criticism of your personality. It's not a calculated attack designed to make you unhappy. It's not revenge. It's not a product of your teacher's unhappy life, collapsing marriage, or sense of impending doom. They found that funny. It's not an indication you're not up to it and you'll never be successful. My feedback is there to improve your work and doesn't describe you. So there you go. Nice little simple way of exploring that as well. So there's one way of approaching VESPA in the classroom. You have some intervention activities ready and you deliver them at the precise moment they're needed. You look for the problem emerging and you deliver it. Of course, there are other ways, and that is you have a little kind of mini curriculum. Now, you might think, well, we could have a little mini curriculum that kind of ran alongside the pastoral curriculum. But often when I've seen these work, it's because they're replacing pastoral curricula because there isn't time to do it in a pastoral setting. Here's an example of one member of staff developing a little VESPA curriculum for her area of study. She's in charge of caring professions at level 1, 2, and 3. And you can see at the top of the screen here, she's deciding how many messages do they need across the year. 13, I think she's circled top left there. She's decided I've got time to do about 13 little 15-minute sessions across the year. And you can see along the bottom there from September on the left to January circled in the middle there that she's trying to figure out roughly what order she would want her students to be getting these little mini interventions. So here's a member of staff who's anticipating the problem students are going to have and designing interventions ahead of time. The other approach, the first aid approach, is you give staff 10 activities and you say, whenever you think you need to pull them out, that's when to do it. Okay, so we've got about half an hour left together, folks. And I just wanted to cover a couple of other things. Sean and I were chatting, and I think these emerged as 2 things that you might want to consider. Okay, first, how are we going to convince members of staff and students and parents, if necessary, that VESPA is having some sort of impact? Here's things to consider. That you don't have to wait for exam results. As I mentioned at the start of the session, that it would be madness, wouldn't it, to say let's wait 2 years to see whether VESPA's had any impact. Instead, I would advise micro changes in culture and climate through these kind of proxies. Okay, so you might use VESPA psychometric data. You might have put them through the questionnaire at the start of the year, and then you put them through at the end of the year, and you say, look, they're feeling much more confident about their levels of vision or their levels of attitude, whatever it happens to be. Sure, but there are other things as well. You could measure, you could get attendance data from 2018, 2019 to tutorial sessions, and you could compare it to attendance data in 2022 and say, look, kids are attending tutorials more, and that's a kind of proxy for the fact that they're getting more value out of them. You might look for the submission and quality of tasks, coursework submissions, portfolio submissions. You might look for negative behavior. Oh, by the way, just to come back to the submissions thing, we had negative behavior log entries at our place for students who didn't submit homework on time. So I kind of got obsessed about how many of these come through, how many times are students at Key Stage 4 and 5 being criticised for handing in homework late. And after we've done some work on time management, attention management, systems generally, you know, are we seeing a drop in the number of late submitted pieces of work? And we did. Similarly, you can look at other negative behavior log entries. To come back to something Sian mentioned earlier, indistractable spaces, we started measuring the number of students who chose to work in the Library and Learning Resource Centre before school, after school, and during study periods at Key Stage 5, so that we could measure the gradual increase in the numbers of students doing that. We looked for withdrawals of textbooks and particular journals. I was really into New Scientist at the time, because I know a lot of our kids often said things like, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor. But they never did any kind of proactive reading about science at Key Stage 5. So we needed to encourage and measure the impact we were having there. So how many times are textbooks being taken out? How many times are journals being taken out? You might be looking at access to VLE pages. Take up of voluntary leadership activities such as D&E. We became the biggest provider of D&E in the northwest of England, accidentally almost, because we were encouraging students to constantly kind of challenge themselves and apply for leadership opportunities. How many are volunteering to help at open evenings? How many are helping you run assemblies lower down the school? You might have effort questionnaires where they're asked to record how many hours they're working per week. You might have to look at, you know, attendance at parents' information units, parents' events. Anything like that can work as a proxy for a kind of a measure of micro changes in culture and climate. Okay. So don't restrict your measurements of impact to results. I wanted to show you some examples of schools and colleges who have done it. So here you go. I tend to see it kind of fall into three groups. Some schools do measure the impact of VESPA using quantitative outcome data. All right, so here we go. Here's an example of a group of schools in Lincolnshire who the kids all took the VESPA questionnaire at the start of the process, 800 of them roughly. And then they had a series of 10 VESPA lessons, and then they took the questionnaire again at the end of the process. And, we had these micro changes in scores as over a large group of students, they began to feel much more confident about their vision for the future, or, the ways in which they were practicing. And of course, averages suppress interesting observations. There was plenty of under there to have a look at as well. Here's another school who've just kindly got in touch recently to say, thanks for all your help and support. Here's what happened in our VESPA cycles. So you've got the cycle 1 of the questionnaire and cycle 2 of the questionnaire. That's a phenomenal leap. Not seen one that big for a little while. So they've clearly kind of really gone for it. What was interesting about Chiltern Hills is that they lost a kid in year 12 who dropped out to go and do something else. And they went back to the VESPA report of that student. And now they've got this thing where if a student has a vision score of 1, 2, or 3 combined with an attitude score of 1, 2, and 3, they see that as a retention at-risk student in terms of retention. So they can begin to intervene much more quickly with students who don't know why they're there and already feel very negative about their chances of success. So you might be able to do something similar. Here's Idris Davis, who are doing it. It's always good to see them sharing their data as well for round 1 and round 2. You don't need to use the questionnaire necessarily. This is from Chesham Grammar School, Katie Cork, writing about her VESPA project. And she did some correlational analysis because the kids had done some mock exams. So she compared high scores on the VESPA mindset questionnaire with what happened in the mock exams and found there was a significant positive correlation between VESPA mindset and academic achievement. And qualitative feedback from students and staff showed positive effects of the program. So you might be able to do something like that. And here's Radia College as well. They use ALPS. And so they're gradually collecting value-added data to evidence that cohorts or groups of students are performing better than they were before. Implementing the VESPA system has helped us keep improving. So interesting ways of using quantitative, data, but you can also try the qualitative data approach. This is a school who asked a series of asked students to respond to a series of statements at the start and the end of the project. So I know what I need to do in my independent work on a day-to-day basis, or I understand how much work I should be doing in and outside of lessons, or what's the third one? I'm supported by the school in making the transition from GCSE to A-level. And they make these kind of, the kids answer on a Likert scale or similar. And then they're looking for a lower score after intervention. Blue bars indicate final scores and orange bars indicate initial scores. So the kids are improving on many of these statements, not all of them, but there's some interesting observations there. Attendance. This is a group of colleges in Cornwall, the interior of Cornwall as well. You know, kids have to travel vast distances for post-16 study down there. And they were finding they couldn't even get kids to turn up to their GCSE retake exams. They wouldn't even show up. So they were really interested in attendance impacts. All right. At the end of the bottom of the first paragraph here, from the VESPA group at Petrock, 100% of students attended exams against a 2017-18 benchmark of 87%. So they were just really delighted with the fact that the kids were showing up to their exams in a way that they hadn't been before. They had a sprint to the finish session that was kind of VESPA groups of kids being shown how to revise. Quite like that idea. And then finally, you can sometimes persuade staff with reports or case studies, even when your quantitative and qualitative data might not be as persuasive. I say this because I used to be a head of English, and I tried persuading my lot with outcome data, and they couldn't have cared less, honestly. You know? These are people who are here because they like teaching Jane Eyre, not because their head of department's going, guys, we got an ALPS of 4. They just couldn't care less whether we got an ALPS of 4 or not. But they responded well to reports or case studies. You know, kids saying, I found this useful. So one of the things we got is students to write down their thoughts and ideas about how they were studying at the time. So they'd take a VESPA questionnaire, it'd give them a score of 3 for vision or whatever, and then we'd say to them, just write us 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph, how accurate do you think the questionnaire is? It doesn't matter whether they say it is or not. Second paragraph, what do you think you should be working on this year? And then we'd share these with staff, and it often really convinced them, oh gosh, yeah, this is a program that encourages students to reflect on how they're learning. This is really impressive. Here's student 2. Student 2 went down really well, just because of his honesty. You know, third line down towards the right hand side here, this kid says he's been caught out, really, hasn't he? He's done his VESPA activity, his VESPA questionnaire. He's got a low score for effort. And he writes, I do the minimum amount of work required of me and have so for all my life. So, you know, and staff were convinced by this. Oh yeah, we've got students finally admitting that this is what they're up to and what they need to do to improve. So really good, thoughtful case studies can be used as well to engage staff and to measure impact. Okay. So that's measuring impact. Any questions, comments on that before I move on? Because I'm just going to leave time for questions, comments, and observations at the end. Sian, I'm conscious that I haven't looked at the chat now for a little while. So has anything else come through that it'd be nice to kind of reflect on or listen to?
The only thing that's come through is Darren had to leave, so he said.
Oh, of course he did. Yeah.
Yeah, he said, really valuable session. Thank you, Martin. Would it be possible to send me the classroom intervention PowerPoint you're using? I've already got the departmental approach PowerPoint, and see you on the 17th.
Yeah, no problem. That's and just to underscore that for everyone else who's still with us, yeah, you're getting a copy of tonight's PowerPoint. So that's all.
Thank you.
That's all.
Just on the notion of impact, right? Colleagues won't be surprised at all that I asked Martin to talk about impact.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we all sit in the impact boat, as in what difference things make in terms of whoever it's supporting, really, whether it's young people or colleagues. But I think I don't know if colleagues here this afternoon have got any examples of what differences they've observed that VESPA has made to their cohort or to individual learners. If you have some examples and you could share them, that would be fabulous. I think the other thing to say is it probably goes without saying that any planned activities over a period of time, it will always be worth considering, well, how am I going to sort of measure the impact of this over time, of this activity or group of activities, even if you just picked just some aspects of the VESPA model to do that, because obviously some stuff will be easier than others to do. I don't know if colleagues want to comment about that as well.
Excellent. So let's take a moment or two.
Yeah, Zach is typing something, but see what comes through on there. But sorry, Martin, back to you.
No. Let's take. I think you've raised something really important there, Sian. Let's give staff a moment or two to reflect and share any questions, observations.
Oh, it was good to see Idris Davis on that example as well earlier, because Idris Davis are with us today, Sarah and Darren. So yeah.
Hi guys.
I don't know if you want to talk about that, Sarah, your analysis.
Yeah, we were asked to present to the governors actually about how it was going, and Darren brought those that data together. Yeah. Because he works with small groups of Key Stage 3 and 4, throughout the year, whereas I sort of focus on the Key Stage 5 pupils. I've actually seen them today and done the vampire test and the 1 to 10 scale with them today, the aptitude and the effort tasks, which they find it hilarious when I put the vampire test up on the I think it really is. They do enjoy it actually, and it really gets them thinking. And it's quite nice that when they arrive to Key Stage 5 and they continue the tasks with me in a timetabled lesson, that they have had a bit of experience with it with Darren throughout lower school. So yeah, it's working really well for us at the moment.
So tell me how the presentation to the governors went. Was that a nerve-wracking moment of standing up in front of the great and the good?
Well, it was, as everything is, mostly been for the last couple of years, it was virtual. So I find it slightly easier then, because there's no real people there, is there, I suppose. But yeah, no, it was really positive, and obviously they don't really know what it is. So it was nice for them to hear about what it is that we're doing to try and aid our students and help them progress, through the non-cognitive skills that we've been talking about.
I think it's worth also pointing out, if you've got anything to add on this one, that progress in terms of responses to the VESPA questionnaire is not linear either. That often what we find is that students score themselves lower after a period of reflection than they would have done at the start. That happened quite a lot with us when we were working with schools. That kids would bombastically score themselves quite high on effort, then we'd do a lot of effort activities and they'd realise they weren't working as hard as they thought they were. Have you seen something like that, that kids are often more realistic in the second round of the questionnaire? Or have you not got that far yet?
We haven't got as far as doing the second round of the questionnaire, but we did discuss that today, actually, in relation to they've probably had some midterm tests now with sort of concrete results in front of them, and were they realistic in their ideas of how much work they're doing? Has it consolidated what they thought, or have they changed their opinion about their effort and how much practice they're doing based on what's been given back to them recently?
Okay, good. So you've surfaced that one at least. Any other comments coming through in the chat, folks?
There's one from Zach, Martin. Zach says, we're still in the early days of our VESPA Academy, but it is so interesting to hear our VESPA candidates discussing some of the VESPA aspects with staff, talking about their vision for the future, etc. Systems they are putting in place to achieve also. And I think for us, VESPA has reminded learners of the other, in inverted commas, aspects that go into high achievement.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, Zach. Thank you for that. And I think there are ways of capturing that. Okay, if you're having those interesting conversations, capture them in the form of case studies. They're often just as compelling as they might be to try and measure impact in other ways as well. So do try and creatively capture those conversations or those changes in student attitude or posture when it comes to learning.
Yeah, because I think anecdotally we gather a lot of stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
You get that good feeling that, whoa, this is working, or I can really start to see. But sometimes you need to go the extra miles to get the actual more what's the word, realistic evidence, whether it's a redo of questionnaires or a learner voice. Is are always an excellent way of capturing progress.
They are indeed. Thanks, Sean. And Sean, just jump in at any point if anything else arrives on the chat. Terrific to hear from people either in the chat or on the mics. So thank you for that. One other thing I wanted to talk about is supporting well-being and upstream versus downstream planning. So just 15 minutes on this, folks, and then we will wrap things up. Okay. I wanted to remind you of this. I don't know whether you've seen this before or indeed, I can't actually remember whether we explicitly went through this as part of the training. I'll have to go back and look at every slide that we've done in the past. But this is the work of David Kolb, University of Leicester. Kolb's really good on experiential learning, the idea that some of the most powerful lessons we learn are through experiencing and trying to solve problems. And Kolb suggests a 4-part problem solving model. So I think it might be worth just spending a moment or two with this, because the idea of student well-being is often one that's very difficult to quantify, to measure, to accurately and insightfully discuss. We spend a lot of time saying the kids are stressed, or obviously we've got lots of problems with mental health. We hear these messages a lot, don't we, as we talk to staff. But it's difficult to plan for solving those problems without a really clear sense of what's going on. So Kolb suggests this, that when we're faced with a problem, that rather than kind of responding almost immediately, the kids have all got mental health problems, quick, let's put on some yoga sessions at lunchtime. Instead of responding immediately, we spend some time really pulling apart the problem, moving through 4 stages. It's a kind of loop, an endless loop, really. So here's what Kolb says, that we begin top right with number 1. What exactly is happening? This is about defining your problem precisely, understanding the people involved, using all available data and collecting more if necessary, being open-minded, brainstorming, listening. When I was first taught this model, by the way, I was asked to think of a problem I had in my own school. And I was not allowed to leave quadrant 1, what is happening, for 10 minutes. I was working with 2 members of staff at the time, and both of them were desperate to get on to why and what can we do. Desperate. But the fact that we were forced to do it for 10 minutes really changed our thinking. I think people have personal preferences for these. You see, I'm a kind of what's happening kind of guy, I think. But I was working with a why is it happening person. She started every sentence with, well, I'll tell you why that is. Historically, we used to do this. She'd been at the school forever. So whenever we were problem solving, Hayley would say, I'll tell you why that is. It's because historically, and I was working with another member of staff who was a definite number 3, what can we do about it kind of person. Whereas I was kind of thoughtfully still at stage 1, he was like, I've already called the parents. We've got a meeting going on. We've got a special assembly. What? Slow down. So Kolb argues that if we dedicate the same amount of time to each part of the process, what's happening? Why is it happening? What can we do about it? We generate much better solutions. So if you are in a situation where you're thinking student mental health and well-being's a problem for us, this might be a model that might help. Let's work through it. For example, what's happening? Students are struggling with their mental health. If you took 10 minutes on this, you could really get deep into it, and that will generate a much better solution. So you might ask yourself, okay, which students? How many of them? Are students saying they're struggling with their mental health, or are staff saying it of students? Which staff are saying it? What exactly are they saying? When are they saying it? What other evidence? What counter evidence? What reason are they giving? What are the characteristics of the students or staff who are saying this? Is there a link with tutor groups, subjects chosen, time of the year, does family play a role? Lots and lots to be thinking about in the what's happening section. And then 10 or 15 minutes in, when you really think you've exhausted that, allow yourself to work through, why is this happening? Okay, has there been sufficient support? Have we made our messages about study clear? Have we over-communicated expectations? Are our instructions clear? Is transition a problem? Has there been time to discuss, reflect, adapt? Are students comfortable in a certain zone and we're pushing them out of it? Are they accurately expressing their issues or not? Have we celebrated progress? Have we kind of forgotten to, so none of them feel they're doing very well? Are they struggling with motivation? Have we revisited their why? Do they know why they're on their courses? Have we had conversations and interventions? Have they changed things? Lots of things there on why. We can list a lot of uncontrollables there as well, but, our idea is to focus on controllables. And then when we get to what can we do about it, if we've really lavished some time on the first 2, we might end up with, could we pair students together in tutor time? Could we model time management techniques in assembly style sessions? Could we give them leadership roles about stress management and they kind of learn it by delivering it to others? Could we be celebrating small rewards? Could we running interventions? Are we involving parents in short-term focus groups? Are we making reasonable adjustments to expectations? Are we looking at attention management and distraction? Are we adjusting tutor group membership? Whatever it happens to be, I think your outcomes, your plans and interventions might be much better as a result. So I think that's really worth thinking about when it comes to, obviously all the kids have got mental health issues, which you sometimes hear in moments of crisis. And I do recommend using that kind of model to try and really get to the bottom of this. It's David Kolb's experiential learning model, University of Leicester, really useful. Now, upstream versus downstream solutions. I've got a clip for you, but we don't need to listen to it really. what I'd suggest is this: if this is a concern that you've got, that you might have a focus group, all right? And your focus group question might be, what are you finding hard about study at this level? So that we get a really accurate what is happening situation, as opposed to a kind of a record of the situation which is muddied by kind of emotion and panic. So a great focus group question to go at this, I think, in terms of getting 20 or 30 students together and getting them to, or 10 students in 3 groups to talk about this particular question. Upstream or downstream solutions, just to give you a quick summary of this, is the idea that, I don't know whether you remember it, but there's this notion that it's a parable, I think. Past a river and sees a kid struggling in the water, so he leaps in, rescues the child, takes them to the edge of the river, and other people begin to help him because there are more kids in the water. So everyone's diving in, rescuing these kids out of the water. More children are in the water, still more. And eventually one of the rescue party leaves the others and starts heading upstream. And they're all, where are you going? We need all hands on deck rescuing these kids. And of course, this person says, well, I'm going upstream to find out why they're falling in. And so the parable illustrates the idea of downstream solutions, which is just firefight, rescue them, and upstream solutions, which might be interview the kids and finding out exactly why they're feeling this way and how we might be able to help them. And I think with problems like this, it's worth considering upstream versus downstream solutions. I work with a number of staff at universities, and they're noticing it too. And I think there's some interesting material on university websites about it at the moment. Here's the University of St Andrews, who've interviewed students to find that, aside from the things that don't bother us, finance, living away from home for the first time, the study-related issues fell into these 7 groups: examinations, deadlines, returning to study, pressure of combining paid work and study, organisation, time management, procrastination. Were the ones that they were seeing in their students. I think we might find something similar. I interviewed a member of staff at MMU. Here was her summary of what was going on. Lateness and poor attendance lead to a nightmare spiral of never knowing what's going on for some of these students. So analysing the situation and getting a really clear sense of where is the stress or challenge to well-being coming from is a good one. There's your upstream, downstream clip for you, but you don't have to watch that now. And I think sometimes schools start with their downstream solutions, don't they? We're going to teach mindfulness. We're going to run meditation classes. We're going to assign endless numbers of counsellors and learning mentors to all these kids. But when it comes to well-being, a possibility is to consider exactly what's going wrong: examinations, deadlines, time management, leaving assessments to the last minute, combining paid work and study. There's a lot of system stuff in here. And then coming up with some upstream solutions instead, teaching time management techniques, using task boards to capture jobs externally, ritualizing and habitualizing work routines, encouraging balance, coaching students. So I think the important thing that I'm trying to emphasize here is that if you've got your upstream solutions like this, if you've done a really good analysis of the problem, you might end up with a, I suppose, little mini VESPA curriculum that heads off many of the problems that develop later on. So what I did was I went through the books, A-level mindset, GCSE mindset, and the student mindset, and I chose the ones that I felt might be really good to develop time management techniques, capture jobs externally, ritualize and habitualize work routines, and encourage balance. Okay, so all of these activities are available in the books, and I kind of work as a little 10 activity mini curriculum for students who are struggling with anxiety. So one to consider there, by the way. Have to, ought to, want to. The one at the bottom isn't in any of the books. It's a newer one, but I've left you the the slides here, so that's dead easy to go through. Before we finish, sorry, I'm having another little crisis about whether I've clicked the include system audio. So before we finish, I wanted to share one other thing that I think has been useful. It's called the corridor principle, and it's really got me thinking about intervention, taking action and intervening with students. This is Campbell Walker. He's a designer and artist talking about the corridor principle. His was the first introduction to the idea that I'd ever come across. So I still think quite a bit about this video. He says, look, you've got a problem, you know, whether it's with student well-being or with engagement or whatever it happens to be. Use the corridor principle to reassure yourself that action works, all right? He says indecision is the incorrect response to a problem. Instead, as you start to take action, opportunities open up. Let's have a quick listen to him.
The third reason that just picking something works is called the corridor principle. This is the idea that
I
as
can't see it, Martin, sorry.
previously could.
How can you not?
I can't
Apologies.
now.
Yeah, nearly. Let me.
I could see it, Martin.
Could you?
Yeah.
All right. Let me give it. Let me give it another go, guys. The corridor principle. Here we go.
The third reason that just picking something works is called the corridor principle. This is the idea that as you act, you see options that you previously couldn't see when you were still. Inaction is like staring at a long corridor. Action is like walking through it. Even if it's the wrong action, by walking down that corridor, you'll see rooms, new opportunities, things you couldn't have possibly seen if you just stayed still. What the corridor principle says is that there aren't multiple directions, there's two, stopping and starting. And by starting, you create more options than if you just stay still. And that picking any direction is the right direction.
Yeah, still love that as a principle to think about intervention and trying to change and improve things in schools. That sometimes we become, I suppose, frozen by the possibilities and opportunities. Which direction do we take? What action do we take? But the corridor principle tells us we begin to take action. We move down the corridor and we begin to see further doors, options, opportunities that we couldn't see when we were standing still. So I think the same goes with all of these things today, that we might have talked about departmental audits and you might be thinking, oh, what action could I take with that? Well, any action in a way takes you forward and opens up new opportunities. So the same goes for the others as well. Hyperlinks there to schools using VESPA, links to the questionnaire as usual and the website. And of course, 10 books that are better than the ones I've written, in case you're interested in any of those as well. So that draws today's session to a close. Hope there's been some useful stuff there. I'm sending the PowerPoint through to Sian. So if there's anything you've seen that you want to use with staff or students, feel free. Couple more comments in the chat, I think, Sian. So if there's anything we've missed, shall we try and pick them off now? Oh, it's Sian saying, see you on the 17th of Jan. Yes, we're meeting again early next year, aren't we?
Yeah. And I think Grant had put a comment in, which I hadn't read out, about early days as well, just following on from Zach's comment. Can you see? Yeah.
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Grant. Appreciate that. Yeah, and we've got Zach as well.